I once thought my parents were the perfect embodiment of honor and power, until both of my children died in the same way, at the same hospital, under the same doctor. When I dug deeper, I uncovered mysterious payments, altered records, and a truth that chilled my blood. My own family had hired someone to harm my children, to protect the pure bloodline of the Whitmores. Now it's their turn to pay for every tear I've shed. Hello, my name is Jackson Whitmore, but if you meet me on the days I escape the shadow of my family, I just want you to call me Jack. Just Jack. At 27, I live in a luxury apartment in the heart of Atlanta, where skyscrapers reflect light like cold, gleaming jewels. From my living room window, I can see the city sprawling out, twinkling like a dream that never sleeps. But sometimes I look out and only see myself, a man trapped in a glass cage of fame, expectations, and the Whitmore name. I grew up in a family where power and money were the only language. My father, Thomas Whitmore, 58, is a businessman as cold as steel, with piercing eyes that could make anyone in a boardroom bow their head. He always said emotions were a human weakness, something that derailed the perfect machinery of reason. My mother, Eleanor Whitmore, 56, is a proud, frighteningly intelligent woman. She was once a biomedical researcher, but now she's known in high society for her discipline and exacting standards. Our family mansion on Northside Hill isn't just a home. It's a symbol. 3 generations of tycoons from Whitmore Financial Holdings built that empire, and I was destined to inherit it. From a young age, every step of my life was planned. The best schools, studying abroad in England, graduating with a finance degree from Oxford. I wasn't allowed to choose, to fail, or to be myself. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a polished man in a pristine suit, hair neatly combed, but inside I wanted to scream. I longed to live like an ordinary person, not the Whitmore heir. I wanted to run in the rain without worrying about ruining expensive leather shoes, to sit in a rundown cafe and talk to someone without fear of them knowing who I was. Then on a sweltering summer day in Atlanta, I met her. Amara Collins, a name that would later become the heartbeat of my soul. That day I was attending a charity event to renovate a school in a poor neighborhood in South Atlanta. It was one of the projects our company sponsored, mostly to polish our public image. I went reluctantly, just wanting to fulfill my obligation and return to my pile of financial reports. But when I stepped into the small dusty schoolyard, I saw her. Amara, 25, a preschool teacher of African descent, standing among a group of children smiling as brightly as the sun. She wore a light blue shirt, her hair tied up high, her hands smudged with paint from helping the kids paint a new wall. Her smile, the way she knelt down to talk to a crying child, the way she wiped sweat from her brow and still laughed. It was like a cool breeze blowing through my stifled heart. I stood there, forgetting why I'd come. "Are you just going to stand there staring or actually help?" Amara called out to me, her tone half teasing, half serious. The kids giggled, and for the first time in my life, I felt as awkward as a schoolboy. I stepped forward, took the paintbrush she handed me, and started painting. We didn't talk much, but every time she showed me how to mix colors or laughed because I got paint on my shirt, I felt like I was alive, truly alive. In the days that followed, I found excuses to return. Sometimes I brought building materials, other times I helped fix the school's roof. I didn't tell her about my background. To her, I was just Jack, a clumsy guy who liked to help. And I liked that. With Amara, I didn't have to be perfect, didn't have to uphold an image or worry about judgmental eyes. Amara lived in a small apartment in South Atlanta where the streets were noisy and smelled of bread from the corner bakery. She was simple, lively, and had a sincerity I'd never seen in anyone from high society. One time she invited me to dinner at her place. It was just spaghetti and salad, but the way she talked about the kids at her school, the way she laughed when she spilled sauce on the table, made it feel like the most lavish feast I'd ever had. "Jack, have you ever just walked without knowing where you're going?" she asked me once as we sat on a park bench eating ice cream from an old food cart. "No," I admitted. I always have to know where I'm going. If I don't, my parents wouldn't be pleased. She looked at me, her eyes seeming to see through everything I hid. Try it sometime. Just walk, no thinking. The world won't fall apart. And I did. That day we wandered through small streets with no purpose, no plan. She pointed out a vibrant mural telling me about the street artist who painted it. She pulled me into an old bookstore where the smell of aged paper and the sound of jazz made me forget about numbers and contracts. She taught me how to live, not to achieve something, but to feel. I started seeing her more often. On weekend afternoons, we sat by the Chattahoochee River watching the water flow quietly. She told me about her dream of opening a free preschool for underprivileged kids. I told her about my days in England, but I avoided mentioning my family or the Whitmore name. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized I was in love. Not a fleeting infatuation or impulsive passion, but a deep, profound feeling, as if she was the missing piece I'd been searching for my whole life. In Amara, I saw a different world. Simple, warm, unpretentious. She didn't care what I owned or where I came from. To her, I wasn't the heir to a corporate empire, not the son of Thomas and Eleanor. I was just Jack, the guy who made her laugh, who held her hand when the wind picked up. One evening, as we stood under the dim glow of a streetlight, she suddenly took my hand. "Jack, have you ever thought about what happiness is?" I looked into her eyes, my heart pounding. I used to think it was money, power, but now I think it's this moment, being here with you. She smiled, her cheeks flushing under the light. "You're quite the charmer." Careful, I might get used to words like that. I laughed, pulling her closer. For the first time, I kissed her. That kiss was like a promise, that I'd do anything to hold on to this moment, to hold on to her. But deep down, I knew. The Whitmore name, my family, and the world I was trying to escape wouldn't let me go so easily. I knew this love was a dangerous secret. I knew if my family found out, they would never accept her. A preschool teacher, someone who didn't belong to their world. But I didn't care. With Amara, I found true happiness not in wealth or status, but in the peace of being with the person I loved. In the days that followed, Amara and I lived in a secret world we created for ourselves. Every time I left her apartment, I carefully looked around, avoiding curious eyes or phones that might snap a photo. But as the saying goes, you can't hide a needle in a sack forever. One morning, as I sat in my office at Whitmore Financial Holdings, my phone buzzed incessantly. A message from an old friend. "What's going on, man?" Attached was a link to the front page of a tabloid. I clicked it and my heart stopped. There was a photo of me and Amara from the charity event the previous week, capturing the moment I leaned down to kiss her forehead in the schoolyard. She was smiling, her eyes sparkling, and I, Jack, not Jackson Whitmore, looked happier than ever. The headline read, "Whitmore heir in love with poor teacher, secret or scandal." Blood rushed to my head, my hands trembling so much I dropped the phone. That photo, that private moment, was now exposed to all of Atlanta. I knew this would happen eventually, but I didn't expect it to come so soon, so cruelly. I hurriedly called Amara. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the worry beneath it. "Jack, I don't care what they write. But are you okay?" I wanted to say I was fine, that everything would be all right, but the words caught in my throat. Because at that moment, my phone buzzed again. It was my father, Thomas Whitmore. The message was curt. "Come home. Now." The mansion on Northside Hill had never made me feel so small as it did that day. The vast living room, with its antique paintings on the walls and the light from the crystal chandelier, seemed to swallow me whole. My father sat in an armchair, his hands clasped tightly, his eyes sharp as knives. My mother stood by the window, her back straight, her face expressionless. On the table lay the tabloid with the photo of me and Amara, like a verdict awaiting pronouncement. "Explain yourself, Jackson," my father said, his voice low but cutting like a blade. "Who is she? A preschool teacher? What do you think you're doing with this family's honor?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Her name is Amara Collins. I love her, and she has nothing to do with this family's honor or money." My father let out a laugh, but it was a dry, humorless sound. "Love? You call this cheap emotion love? You are Jackson Whitmore, the heir to this empire. You don't have the right to love someone who doesn't belong in our world." "Amara isn't an outsider," I replied, my voice starting to shake. "She's the only person who makes me feel like I'm living, not just existing to please you and Mother." My mother, Eleanor, finally spoke. Her voice was soft but cold, like a velvet-wrapped blade. "Jackson, you're smarter than this. You know how this family works. We don't live for emotions. Emotions are a weakness, and you're letting them blind you." I looked at my mother, my heart heavy. "Mother, I'm not blinded. I just want to live my own life, not the one you and Father have planned for me." My father stood abruptly, slamming his hand on the table, making the crystal glass tremble. "Enough! If you don't end this, you will no longer be the heir. You'll be cut off from the company, from this family. Are you willing to throw everything away for a girl with nothing but a cheap smile?" Blood rushed to my face, but I didn't back down. "If that's the price for living true to myself, then I'm ready to pay it." The air in the room seemed to freeze. My father stared at me, his eyes burning with anger and disappointment. My mother turned away as if she couldn't bear to witness this moment. I knew I was standing at a crossroads with no way back. I had tried, I had fought, but my words were like stones thrown into the sea, powerless to change anything. That night I returned to the familiar living room of the mansion where I had grown up, where I had been taught who I was supposed to be. The heirloom ring, a gold band engraved with the Whitmore crest, sat heavily in my pocket. It was a symbol of everything I was destined to become. But now it was just a burden. I placed the ring on the table in front of my parents. "I don't want this anymore," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "I don't want to live the life you've chosen for me. I choose Amara. I choose myself." My father was silent, his eyes seeming to burn through me. My mother turned away, her shoulders rigid. No words of farewell, no glance. I walked out of the mansion, my heart heavy yet lighter than ever. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I drove through Atlanta's brightly lit streets straight to Amara's small apartment. When she opened the door, her eyes were full of worry. I told her everything. About the article, the argument with my parents, the ring I'd returned. I held nothing back, not even my fear that I might lose everything. Amara sat beside me, taking my hand. "Jack, I don't need you to be an heir. I just need you to be Jack, the guy who painted walls with me, who laughed like an idiot when he spilled ice cream on his shirt. If you choose me, then I choose you." I looked into her eyes, and all my doubts, all my fears melted away. She was home, the place where I belonged. "Amara," I whispered, "do you know you're worth more than anything in this world?" She laughed, tears glistening on her cheeks. "Don't say that, Jack. I'm just a preschool teacher. But if you've chosen me, I won't let you regret it." That night we sat together, planning a new life, a simple life, free from skyscrapers and lavish parties. I would find a new job far from my family's corporation. Amara would continue teaching, bringing smiles to children's faces. We dreamed of a small house, maybe in the suburbs, where we could plant a garden and listen to birdsong every morning. About a week later, Amara and I found a small apartment in the suburbs of South Atlanta, where the streets were shaded by oak trees and the hum of insects filled the evenings. The apartment wasn't large, just a single bedroom, a small kitchen nook, and a balcony just big enough for 2 chairs and a potted plant. But to us, it was our entire world. Every morning I woke up beside Amara, listening to her hum an old song while brewing coffee, and my heart felt lighter than ever. No more tense board meetings, no more cold glares from my father, no more reminders from my mother about my duty to the family. Here I was just Jack, the man who loved Amara and was loved by her in return. I found a job at a small financial technology firm where no one knew I was Jackson Whitmore. The work wasn't glamorous, no million-dollar deals, but it was enough for Amara and me to live comfortably. Amara continued teaching at her preschool, bringing home stories about the kids, like how a little boy painted an entire world on the wall just for her, or how a little girl hugged her tightly at the end of the day. Every evening we sat on the balcony eating simple meals, sometimes just sandwiches and tomato soup, but I had never felt happier. A year passed, and then one afternoon as golden sunlight poured into the apartment, Amara pulled me onto the sofa, her eyes sparkling. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm pregnant." I sat still for a moment, not out of shock, but because the joy was so overwhelming I didn't know how to react. Then I pulled her into a tight embrace, laughing until tears streamed down my face. "Really? We're going to have a baby?" She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks, and we held each other, laughing and crying at the same time, like two kids who had just found a treasure. We named our child Emery, a name that meant strength and resilience. Though we didn't yet know the baby's gender, we imagined our child with my eyes and Amara's warm brown skin, a perfect blend of the two worlds we belonged to. I started dreaming of mornings pushing a stroller through the neighborhood, of Emery's laughter echoing through our little apartment. I decided to reach out to my family to share the news. Though I had left them behind, I still held a faint hope that they might be happy for me. I sent a short email to my mother telling her about Amara, about Emery, about our new life. I waited day after day but received only silence. Not a single reply, not a single call. My parents, who had once controlled every step of my life, now refused to acknowledge my existence. It hurt, but I told myself I chose Amara, and that was the right choice. The day Emery was born, my heart felt like it stopped. Our baby lay in Amara's arms, so tiny, with big round eyes like mine and warm brown skin like their mother's. I looked at Emery, at Amara, and thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Emery," I whispered, gently stroking their cheek, "you are my entire world." But that joy lasted only a few hours. Shortly after the birth, the doctor came into the room, his face grave. "We need to place the baby in an incubator for monitoring," he said. "There are some signs suggesting a possible rare genetic disorder. It's just a precaution." The floor seemed to collapse beneath me. Amara gripped my hand tightly, her eyes red but trying to stay calm. "What do you mean?" "My baby's fine, right?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor reassured us they just needed more tests, but his eyes betrayed his concern. I stood outside the intensive care unit, looking through the glass at Emery lying in the incubator, tiny tubes attached to their body. Amara sat nearby, her eyes never leaving our child, silent tears streaming down her face. I wanted to hold her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I was reeling myself. I trusted the hospital, believed they would do everything to save Emery. But every time I saw the fear in Amara's eyes, an invisible dread tightened around my heart. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights. Amara barely left the hospital, sitting by the glass, whispering words of love to Emery. I brought her coffee and sandwiches, trying to make her smile, but her smiles were faint now, like a candle about to go out. I told myself we would get through this, that Emery would be healthy, that this was just a small hurdle. But then, on a rainy morning, the doctor called us into his office. He sat across from us, hands clasped tightly, his voice low. "I'm so sorry," he said. "The baby's heart stopped this morning. We did everything we could, but Emery had a rare, untreatable metabolic disorder. It felt like someone had punched me in the chest." Amara let out a sob, her cries tearing through the silence. I wanted to say something, to scream, to ask why, but I just stood there, frozen. Emery, the child we had loved even before they were born, was gone. Just days ago I had held them in my arms, dreaming of our happy future. Now there was only an unfillable void. Emery's funeral was held quietly in a small chapel. Only a few close friends, Amara's colleagues and her family, came to offer condolences. Amara's parents hugged me, offering words of comfort, but I could only nod, unable to speak. Not a single Whitmore appeared. I wasn't surprised, but their silence still cut like a knife. I had hoped even just a little that they would come, not for me but for Emery, for the grandchild they never met. After the ceremony, Amara and I sat by Emery's portrait. The small photo taken in the brief moment our child lay in their mother's arms was a cruel reminder of what we had lost. Amara held my hand, but she no longer cried. She just stared at the portrait, her eyes empty. "Jack," she whispered, "do you think we did something wrong?" I pulled her into my arms, my tears falling into her hair. "No, Amara, we didn't do anything wrong. We loved Emery, gave them everything we had. But deep down, I couldn't stop asking myself, why? Why Emery? Why us? I had left behind my family's glittering world, chosen a simple life with Amara, yet pain had still found us like a shadow we couldn't escape. I held Amara tighter, trying to shield her, but I knew we were both breaking. 2 years after Emery's death, our lives became a series of quiet days, as if we were both trying to walk a tightrope, afraid that one wrong step would plunge us into the abyss of memories. We rarely spoke of Emery, but she was always there. In the distant look in Amara's eyes as she washed dishes, in the sleepless nights I spent staring at the ceiling, imagining our child's cries. Our small apartment remained warm, but there were silences we dared not touch. Amara continued teaching, still bringing smiles to the children, but I noticed her smile no longer shone as brightly as before. I kept working at the financial technology firm, striving to build a stable life for us both. We didn't talk about the distant future, only lived day by day, as if trying to convince ourselves that time would heal everything. Then one spring afternoon, as the oak trees outside our balcony began to bud, Amara walked into the room holding a pregnancy test. Her eyes sparkled, but they were also filled with worry. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm pregnant again." I looked at her, my heart pounding. Joy mixed with fear like a wave surging within me. I hugged her, whispering, "This time will be different, Amara. We'll do everything right." But even as I said those words, I felt a knot in my chest. I couldn't forget Emery. Couldn't forget the look in Amara's eyes as she sat by the incubator. Couldn't forget the day we lost our child. We were more cautious than ever. Amara saw the doctor regularly, undergoing every possible test. We consulted specialists, read stacks of materials on genetics and prenatal care. I worked extra hours to cover the medical visits, while Amara cut back on teaching to rest more. Every night I placed my hand on her belly, feeling the tiny movements of our baby, and told myself, "This time, it will be okay. This time we'll get to be parents." The day Caleb was born, I felt like I was alive again. Our tiny, healthy boy with soft black hair and pursed lips as if lost in a dream. Amara held him, tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of joy. "Caleb," she whispered, "you are my light." I looked at them, my heart bursting with happiness. Caleb was the gift we had waited for, the hope after those dark days. For the first few days, Caleb was healthy. He ate well, slept soundly, and every time he opened his eyes to look at me, it felt like the whole world was smiling. Amara started singing again, the lullabies she used to hum for Emery. We took countless photos, laughing about who Caleb would resemble more when he grew up. I began to dream of taking him to the park, teaching him to kick a soccer ball, or simply sitting with him on the balcony watching the sunset. But on the 8th day, when we took Caleb for a routine checkup, the doctor looked at the test results with an expression I never wanted to see again. "There are some abnormal symptoms," he said, his voice low. "We need to admit him to the ICU for further monitoring." The floor seemed to shake beneath me. Amara gripped my hand tightly, her face pale. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." "Doctor, you're mistaken, right?" The doctor reassured us they would do everything possible. I held Amara, trying to stay calm, but inside I heard the whisper of fear. No, not again. We trusted the doctor, trusted the hospital, but deep down, I felt an inexplicable sense of dread. The days that followed were a nightmare. Caleb lay in the ICU, tiny tubes wrapped around his small body. Amara sat by the glass as she had with Emery, her eyes red but never leaving our son. I stood behind her, my hand on her shoulder, but I couldn't find words to ease the pain. Each beep from the machines was a knife to my heart. Then on a gray morning, the doctor called us into his office. I knew the moment I saw his face that bad news had come. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice choked. "Caleb didn't make it. His heart stopped due to heart failure, linked to a rare congenital genetic disorder." Amara collapsed into my arms, her cries tearing through the silence. I held her, but I could barely stand myself. "No," I repeated, as if denying the truth could change it. "Not Caleb. Not again." But the truth was as cruel as a sharp blade. Caleb, our light, was gone, just like Emery. Caleb's funeral was held in silence, at the same chapel where we had said goodbye to Emery. Only a few close friends, Amara's colleagues and her family, attended. I stood there holding Amara's hand, but we were both like shadows, empty and lifeless. I couldn't believe fate could be so cruel, couldn't understand why we had to endure this pain a second time. But then as the ceremony neared its end, I heard familiar footsteps. I looked up and my heart stopped. My father, Thomas, and my mother, Eleanor, walked in, accompanied by a few of their financial circle friends. They brought a large wreath, their faces stern, their condolences formal. "We're so sorry," my father said, his voice low but devoid of emotion. My mother nodded, her eyes gliding over Amara as if she didn't exist. I was stunned. After 2 years of silence, after ignoring the news of Emery, they showed up now. Not for me, not for Caleb, but for something I couldn't yet grasp. Amara squeezed my hand, but she said nothing. I felt the tension in her like a string about to snap. After the ceremony, my parents asked to speak privately in a corner of the chapel. I wanted to refuse, to tell them to leave, but Amara nodded, her eyes weary but resolute. We sat down, the 4 of us in a small room, the air heavy as lead. My father spoke first, his voice as cold as in a boardroom meeting. "Jackson, we warned you. You and this girl, you're not genetically compatible. Tragedies like this will keep happening if you insist on staying with her." Blood rushed to my head. "What are you saying? Caleb and Emery died because of illness, not because of Amara." My mother looked at me, her voice soft but laced with intent. "Jackson, love cannot overcome the laws of genetics. You need to think about the future, about the Whitmore lineage. There are more suitable matches, like the Langley girl. A proper marriage would restore our reputation and the purity of our bloodline." I stood up, my hands trembling with rage. "Purity of our bloodline? You're talking about my son, about Caleb, as if he was a mistake. Amara is my wife, the woman I love. I will never betray her." Amara sat silently, her eyes cast down. I waited for her to say something, to stand up and defend our love as she had before. But she only stood and quietly walked out of the room. I called after her, but she didn't turn back. A wave of unease rose within me as if I had lost her again. I turned to my parents, my voice shaking with anger. "Get out. Now. Don't ever show your faces to me or Amara again." My father looked at me, his eyes cold as ice. My mother turned away, her lips pressed tightly together. They left, taking their wreath and their venomous words, leaving me in the empty room. But as the chapel door closed, I knew they were not the kind to give up easily. And deep within me, a seed of doubt began to take root, like a poisonous plant waiting to sprout. In the days following Caleb's funeral, Amara became quieter than ever. She was still there, in our small apartment, but she seemed like a shadow of herself. Every evening, she sat in the armchair, clutching the framed photos of Emery and Caleb, her gaze drifting far away, as if lost in a world I couldn't enter. I tried to pull her out of her pain, bringing home things she loved. Sandwiches from the corner deli, sunflowers that she once said reminded her of summer. I told silly stories about work, about a clumsy colleague spilling coffee on his keyboard, but her smile was fleeting, fragile like a passing breeze. "Amara," I said one night, sitting beside her and taking her hand, "talk to me. What are you thinking? I don't want to lose you. I don't want us to just exist without truly living." She looked at me, her eyes holding a deep sadness but also something else, a restlessness, as if she were hiding something. "Jack, I'm just tired," she said, her voice so soft I had to strain to hear it. "I don't know how to keep going anymore." Then she stood and walked into the bedroom, leaving me with a sense of helplessness. I wanted to scream, to tear down the invisible wall between us, but all I could do was hold her as she slept, hoping my warmth could soothe the wounds I couldn't see. One afternoon I came home after a long shift, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers, hoping they'd make her smile. But when I opened the door, the apartment was suffocatingly silent. There was no soft humming from Amara, no smell of the coffee she usually brewed. Her things, the green sweater she loved, the canvas shoes by the door, even the mug with a smiley face, were gone. On the kitchen table was a single folded piece of paper, Amara's handwriting shaky but clear. My hands trembled as I picked it up, nearly dropping it. "Jack," she wrote, "I'm sorry. I can't keep living with this pain. Every day I see Emery and Caleb in my dreams, and I can't bear the thought that I couldn't protect them. You deserve happiness, but I can't be the one to give it to you anymore. Please don't look for me. Please forgive me." My heart felt like it was being crushed. I called her phone, but it was disconnected. I rushed out, running to the preschool where she taught, asking her friends, her colleagues, even her parents in the Atlanta suburbs. No one knew where she'd gone. Amara, the woman who had been my entire world, had vanished like a gust of wind, leaving no trace. I reported it to the police, but they only shook their heads, saying she was an adult with the right to leave if she chose to. Every night I sat on the balcony staring into the darkness, hoping to see her walking back, but only the sound of crickets and an aching emptiness answered. The days that followed, I lived like a ghost. Work became a meaningless routine, typing on the keyboard, answering emails, nodding in meetings, but my mind was always elsewhere. I saw Amara in every corner of the apartment, the chair where she used to sit, the bookshelf where she arranged her children's books, the pillow she hugged when she slept. Everything was a reminder that I had lost her, lost our 2 children, lost our dream of a family. Then unexpectedly my parents reappeared. One morning as I stepped out of the apartment, my mother was standing there holding a bouquet of white carnations, her face unusually gentle. "Jackson," she said softly, "I know you're suffering. I just want to help." I looked at her, feeling like I was staring at a stranger. "Help?" I asked, my voice dry. "Now you want to help? After you and Father turned your backs on me, on Emery, on Caleb?" She didn't respond, only placed the flowers on the table and left. But that wasn't the last of it. My father started showing up, bringing boxes of food from expensive restaurants, saying things I'd never heard from him before. "Son, don't ruin your future for someone who abandoned you." My mother was subtler, but her words stung like needles. "Open your heart, Jackson. There are people more deserving, people who can bring you true happiness." Their concern felt too unnatural, too polished, like a carefully staged play. A creeping unease began to take hold. Why were they showing up now, right after Amara disappeared? Why were they being kind after 2 years of silence? I wanted to dismiss these thoughts, but they clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. A few weeks later, I went to St. Andrew's Hospital to retrieve Caleb's medical records for insurance purposes. While waiting, a new staff member, a young woman with curious eyes, handed me a copy of the records. She hesitated, then spoke quietly, as if afraid of being overheard. "This file? It's been edited several times. I don't know why, but I thought you should know." Her words hit me like a bolt of lightning. I took the file, thanked her mechanically, and returned home. That night, under the dim glow of a lamp, I opened Caleb's records, reading every line, every number. Then, as if guided by some instinct, I dug through the closet for Emery's old records. I placed the 2 files side by side, comparing every detail. And then I saw it, the horrifying truth that stole my breath. The enzyme test results, the genetic codes, even the doctor's small notes. Everything was identical. Two children born 2 years apart couldn't possibly have medical records matching down to the smallest detail. This wasn't a coincidence. This was orchestrated. My throat tightened, my heart pounding. I remembered my mother's gaze at Caleb's funeral, the way she avoided looking at me. I recalled my parents' strange concern after Amara's disappearance. I thought of their words about incompatible bloodlines. A chilling suspicion swept over me like an icy wind. Could it be? Did my parents have something to do with Emery and Caleb's deaths? The thought made me tremble, but I couldn't shake it. I needed the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I sat in the empty apartment, surrounded by papers and medical records, feeling like I was lost in a maze with no way out. Every number, every word in Emery and Caleb's files was like a knife to the heart, but they were also the only clues I had. I couldn't let emotions take over. If my parents were truly involved in the deaths of my 2 children, I needed proof. Clear, undeniable proof. But I also knew I couldn't do this alone. I contacted Evelyn Shaw, an old friend from college who was now a lawyer. Evelyn was sharp, unafraid to take on powerful forces, and most importantly, someone I trusted. When I called, her voice was as calm as ever, but as I recounted what had happened, about Emery, about Caleb, about the eerie similarities in their medical records, I could hear the tension in her breathing. "Jack," she said, "if what you suspect is true, this isn't just personal. This is a crime. Are you sure you want to dig deeper?" I gripped the phone, my eyes drifting to the framed photos of Emery and Caleb on the table. "Evelyn, they were my children. I don't have a choice." She agreed to help. The next day, Evelyn sent a legal request to St. Andrew's Hospital, compelling them to provide all medical records and documents related to Emery and Caleb's treatments. I waited in agonizing suspense, each day stretching like a century. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, just stared at my phone, hoping an email from Evelyn would bring a breakthrough. When the documents finally arrived, Evelyn called me to her office in downtown Atlanta. She spread the papers across the table, her expression grave. "Jack, there's something you need to see," she said, sliding a sheet toward me. It was a copy of a bank transfer from a company affiliated with Whitmore Financial Holdings, amounting to tens of thousands of dollars, sent to the hospital just before Caleb's death. The note on the transaction simply read, "Special Medical Funding Support." I stared at the number, my heart pounding. "What is this, Evelyn? Medical funding? My parents never give to charity without an agenda." Evelyn nodded, her eyes sharp. "Exactly. The amount is too large and the timing is too convenient. I suspect this was a bribe to a doctor, a nurse, or anyone who could cover up the truth." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I knew my parents were cold, knew they valued the family's reputation above all else, but could they go this far? I wanted to deny it, to believe no one, not even them, could be that cruel. But the identical medical records, their sudden concern after Amara left, everything pointed in one direction. I decided to return to St. Andrew's Hospital. This time I wasn't going as a grieving father, but as a man hunting for the truth. I sought out Sarah, a nurse who had worked the night shift when Caleb was in the ICU. She had always been kind to us, but today when I stood before her, I saw fear in her eyes. "Sarah," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I need the truth. Was there anything unusual about Caleb's case that you didn't tell us?" She shook her head, avoiding my gaze. I don't know anything, Jack. I just did my job." But I didn't give up. I told her about the money, the medical records, the suspicions tearing me apart. After a long silence, Sarah lowered her head, her voice trembling. "I received a payment," she whispered. "They said it was a bonus for good work, but I had to promise not to talk about what happened during that shift. I don't know the details, I swear. I only saw a stranger enter the ICU before the alarm went off." Her words were like a bolt of lightning. "A stranger?" I asked, my voice nearly choking. "Who? What did they look like?" Sarah shook her head. "I didn't see clearly. They were wearing a medical coat, but they weren't hospital staff. I'm sorry, Jack. I needed the money for my own child. I left the hospital, my mind reeling. Sarah didn't know much, but her words confirmed something was wrong. I decided to confront Dr. Graham, the doctor who had overseen both Emery and Caleb's cases. He was a middle-aged man, always professional. But this time, as I stood outside his office, I was no longer the trusting father. "Dr. Graham," I said, my voice cold as ice, "I know something was wrong with my children's deaths. Emery and Caleb's medical records are identical. What do you know about this?" He paled, trying to maintain his composure, but I saw his hand tremble as he held his coffee mug. I pressed him, telling him about the payment from Whitmore Holdings, about Sarah's confession. Finally, he bowed his head, his voice hoarse. "I didn't want to do it," he said. "They gave me a large sum, called it research funding. All I had to do was list the cause of death as a genetic disorder. I didn't ask questions. I'm sorry." I felt blood rush to my head, but I forced myself to stay focused. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. He shook his head. "I don't know exactly." The intermediary said they represented a powerful family. I walked out of his office, my heart heavy as lead. My parents. They didn't just know, they were directly involved. But I still needed proof, something undeniable. A few days later, as I was sorting through papers in the apartment, an anonymous email appeared in my inbox. No subject, no signature, just an attachment. A blurry CCTV video from the ICU hallway the night Caleb died. I watched it over and over, my heart pounding. A figure in a medical coat leaned over Caleb's incubator minutes before the alarm sounded. Their face was unclear, but their movements, swift, deliberate, showed they knew what they were doing. I sent the video to Evelyn. She immediately filed a request for Caleb's biological samples to be tested at an independent lab with no ties to Whitmore Holdings. The days waiting for the results were a nightmare. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think of anything but the images of Emery and Caleb, the children I had sworn to protect. When the results came, Evelyn called me to her office immediately. She placed the report in front of me, her eyes tense. "Jack, Caleb's samples show trace levels of a foreign substance, a drug not included in his treatment plan. It was far above safe levels and could have caused heart failure." I read the report, each word like a stab to the heart. I no longer had doubts. My parents, or someone they hired, had interfered with the deaths of my 2 children. Emery and Caleb didn't die from natural causes. They died because of my family's pride and power, the family I once thought would protect me. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "Evelyn," I said, my voice hoarse, "I want them to pay. Even if it means destroying the Whitmore name, I'll get justice for my children." She nodded, her eyes resolute. "We'll do it. I'll prepare the lawsuit. But Jack, you need to be ready. This will be a long, painful battle." I looked out the window at Atlanta's gray sky, like a storm was brewing. But in my heart, I was no longer afraid. Emery and Caleb deserved justice. And I, even if I had to face the entire world, would not stop until the truth was revealed. Evelyn had prepared the lawsuit, a thick file filled with undeniable evidence. Falsified medical records, bank transfer receipts, Nurse Sarah's testimony, Dr. Graham's confession, and the blurry but damning CCTV footage. Each piece was like a knife to the heart, but they also fueled my resolve to move forward. I knew that filing the lawsuit immediately would cause an explosion, and the reputation of Whitmore Financial Holdings would crumble like a sandcastle. But before doing so, I wanted to confront my parents, not out of hatred, but because I needed to hear the truth from their own mouths. I needed to know if they ever truly loved me or if I was merely a pawn in their game of prestige. I arranged to meet them at the mansion on Northside Hill, a place I once called home, but now felt like a cold memory. As I stepped into the living room, the light from the crystal chandelier still sparkled, but it no longer brought me warmth. My father, Thomas, sat in his armchair, his eyes as sharp and cold as ever. My mother, Eleanor, stood by the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly, her face expressionless. I slipped a small recording device into my pocket, activating it silently. I didn't want a single word of theirs to slip away. "Father, Mother," I began, my voice calm but resolute. "I know the truth about Emery and Caleb. I know about the money from Whitmore Holdings, the falsified medical records, the stranger in the ICU. I want to hear it from you. Why? Why did you do this to my children?" My father let out a scornful laugh. "Jackson, what are you doing? Slandering your own family with these accusations? Do you think we'd let you destroy the Whitmore reputation with these delusional fantasies?" I looked straight into his eyes, unwavering. "These aren't delusions. I have proof, bank transfers, testimonies from the nurse and the doctor. I have video footage showing a stranger injecting something into Caleb." "What did you do?" My mother turned away, her shoulders trembling slightly. My father stood, pointing at me, his voice booming. "Enough! You have no right to question us. We did everything to protect you, to protect this family." "Protect," I shouted, unable to hold back any longer. "Protect by killing my children. Emery and Caleb weren't obstacles in your plans. They were my children, my flesh and blood." The air in the room seemed to freeze. My father was breathing heavily, his eyes blazing with anger, but my mother, for the first time, looked directly at me. Her eyes were red, and I saw a crack in her perfect facade. "Jackson," she said, her voice trembling, "we didn't want you to suffer. We only wanted to protect your future. Amara, she wasn't suitable. Those children, they couldn't be part of the Whitmore lineage." It felt like a slap to the face. "Not suitable?" I repeated, my voice choking. "You're talking about my son and daughter. What did you do? Tell me." My father stepped forward, trying to stop her. "Eleanor, don't say anything." But she shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Jackson, we hired someone to ensure the children didn't survive. A small dose, painless. We thought it was the best way. For you, for the family." Her confession pierced my heart like a blade. I staggered back, my mind reeling. My father shouted, trying to drown her out. "Enough, Eleanor. Be quiet." But it was too late. The recorder in my pocket had captured everything, every word, every breath. I looked at them, the people I once called my parents, now strangers. "You never loved me," I said, my voice hoarse. "You only cared about your reputation, about the Whitmore name. But I'll make sure you pay." My father stared at me, his eyes devoid of remorse. "We did it to protect the Whitmore bloodline. You'll understand one day." I turned and walked out of the mansion, not looking back. Their words echoed in my mind, but I no longer felt pain. There was only a burning resolve to seek justice for Emery and Caleb. A few days later, Evelyn filed the lawsuit in the Georgia State Court, attaching all the evidence: the falsified medical records, the bank transfers, the hospital staff testimonies, the CCTV footage, and the recording of my confrontation with my parents. The case exploded like a bomb. Major newspapers ran headlines: "Whitmore dynasty accused of orchestrating deaths of 2 infants." The story screamed across front pages from Atlanta to New York. Whitmore Financial Holdings, once an invincible empire, was dragged into the spotlight, investigated for bribery, medical tampering, and evidence suppression. The trial unfolded in a tense atmosphere. Reporters crowded outside the courtroom, cameras trained on me as I entered. I said nothing, only clutched the small photo frame of Emery and Caleb in my pocket, a reminder that I was doing this for them. My father, Thomas, was charged with complicity and obstruction of justice. My mother, Eleanor, was charged with murder and medical bribery. The involved doctors and nurses, including Dr. Graham and Sarah, testified, confessing everything in exchange for reduced sentences. Throughout the trial, I sat there listening to the horrifying details: the drugs injected into the fragile bodies of Emery and Caleb, the secret meetings between my parents and hospital staff, the money transferred to buy silence. Each testimony was a stab to the heart, but I never took my eyes off my parents. My father maintained his arrogant demeanor, but my mother, she nearly broke. her eyes vacant as if she was finally realizing the cost of what they had done. The day of the verdict arrived, the courtroom packed. The judge read the sentences in a steady, clear voice. Eleanor Whitmore, guilty of murder and medical bribery, sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Thomas Whitmore, guilty of complicity and obstruction of justice, sentenced to 20 years in prison. All Whitmore family assets are frozen to compensate the victims. The involved medical staff received sentences ranging from 5 to 10 years, with some receiving probation for cooperating with the investigation. As my parents were escorted out of the courtroom, I stood still looking at them one last time. My father didn't meet my gaze, but my mother turned back, her eyes seeming to plead for something. I didn't respond. They had chosen their reputation over the lives of my children, and now justice had been served. I left the courtroom in silence, the late afternoon sun illuminating the small photo frame of Emery and Caleb in my hand. The light was gentle, like a farewell from my two little angels. I knew that though justice had prevailed, the pain in my heart would never fade. But at least I had done the right thing. For Emery, for Caleb, and for myself. In the days following the trial, the Whitmore name became the center of every conversation. Newspapers, television, social media, all were ablaze with the story of crimes hidden under the guise of prestige. Headlines screamed, "Tycoon dynasty collapses. Whitmore Financial Holdings faces unprecedented crisis." The company's stocks plummeted, partners withdrew their investments one by one, and the board of directors was dragged into a series of investigations. The mansion on Northside Hill, once a symbol of power, now stood as a faded shadow sealed off to compensate victims. The Whitmore family, which my parents had placed above all else, was reduced to a cautionary tale of pride and cruelty. I was vindicated, hailed by the press as a hero for standing up against my own family. But every time I saw the Whitmore name in print, I felt only a cold emptiness. I wasn't proud, wasn't triumphant. I was exhausted, as if all my strength had been drained in the pursuit of justice. Atlanta, with its brightly lit streets and towering skyscrapers, now felt suffocating. I needed to leave, to find a place to heal the wounds I had carried for too long. I remembered the afternoons by the Chattahoochee River, when Amara spoke of her dream to live by the sea, where we could listen to the waves and forget the world. Charleston, South Carolina, that was the place we had dreamed of together. I packed a few clothes, the framed photos of Emery and Caleb, and left Atlanta without looking back. Charleston welcomed me with streets shaded by magnolia trees and the salty scent of the ocean. I rented a small apartment facing the sea where each morning I could hear the waves crashing against the shore and see the sunlight sparkling on the water. The apartment was simple, just a bedroom, a kitchen nook, and a small balcony. But to me it was a fresh start. I opened a small coffee shop near the beach, naming it Emery and Caleb's Corner. The name was my way of honoring my two children, not to dwell on the pain, but to keep them alive in my heart, in the simple and beautiful things. Every morning I woke early, brewed coffee, and stood behind the counter watching customers come and go. Fishermen stopped by for a black coffee before heading out to sea. Couples held hands at the corner table, and strangers shared their stories. I listened, smiled, and felt my heart slowly soften. The sound of the waves, the smell of roasted coffee, and the sunlight filtering through the windows reminded me of the days with Amara, when everything was simple, when love was all we needed. But even as my heart tried to heal, I couldn't stop thinking about Amara. She had vanished, leaving me with a letter and an unfillable void. I didn't blame her. The pain of losing two children was too much, and perhaps she needed time to find herself again. But every night as I closed the shop and sat alone on the balcony, I looked out at the sea and prayed that one day she would return. One early morning, when the shop was still quiet, I was wiping down the counter when the doorbell jingled. I looked up, and my heart stopped. Amara stood there in the doorway wearing a pale blue dress, her hair loosely tied, her eyes hesitant but still as warm as ever. She was thinner, her eyes bearing the marks of hard days, but her smile, the smile I had loved more than anything, was still there. "Jack," she said, her voice soft, as if afraid to break the silence. I wasn't sure if I should come, but I heard about the lawsuit, about what you did. I wanted to say, I'm sorry." I froze, unsure of what to say. I wanted to run to her, to hold her, to shout that I had searched for her in every dream, but I only stepped forward and took her hand. "Amara," I whispered, "you don't need to apologize. I just want to know you're okay." We sat down in a corner of the shop by a window overlooking the sea. She told me that after leaving Atlanta, she came to Charleston, living quietly in a small apartment near the river. She worked at a library, spending her days organizing books and avoiding memories of the past. "I thought if I stopped remembering, stopped thinking about Emery and Caleb, the pain would go away," she said, her eyes red. "But I was wrong. I couldn't forget. And when I heard about the lawsuit, about what you did to seek justice for our children, I knew I couldn't keep running." I held her hand tighter, my own tears falling. I told her about my journey, the sleepless nights, the evidence I uncovered, the moment my mother confessed the horrific truth. "I didn't do it for me, Amara," I said, my voice choking. "I did it for Emery, for Caleb, and for our love. I never stopped loving you." She lowered her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, but then she looked up, giving a choked smile. "Jack, I never stopped loving you either." We embraced right there in the quiet coffee shop, as if time had never torn us apart. The sound of the waves outside the window was like a gentle song, and I knew that no matter how painful the past, we still had each other. We decided to start over, free from prestige or hatred, with only love and the memories we chose to keep. Amara moved into my small apartment. She returned to her job at the library, bringing home children's books and reading them to me in the evenings. I continued running Emery and Caleb's corner, and each day I felt my heart grow lighter, as if the old wounds were slowly healing under Charleston's sunlight. 2 years later, Amara became pregnant again. This time, we weren't as afraid. We took care of each other every day, holding hands through every prenatal visit, and when the day of the birth arrived, we burst with joy. Amara gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, healthy, with sparkling eyes and smiles like their mothers. We named them Emery and Caleb as a way for our 2 little angels to live again, in the loving arms of our family. Every afternoon as the sun set over Charleston Sea, I stood on the balcony watching Amara play with our children. Their laughter mingled with the sound of the waves like a song of hope. I knew the past could never be erased, but we had found peace. A true peace built from love, forgiveness, and everything we had overcome together. I held Amara's hand, feeling her warmth, and knew that, after all the storms, we had found each other and found a true home. As time passed, the turbulent waves of the Whitmore story gradually subsided. The headlines that once screamed about my family's crimes gave way to new stories. Whitmore Financial Holdings, once an invincible empire, had crumbled, reduced to a mere name in cautionary tales about business ethics. But in Charleston, in the small haven of Emery and Caleb's corner, Amara's and my story became something else. A story of resilience, compassion, and how people can rise again after unimaginable loss. My coffee shop became a special place. Not because of the coffee, though I took pride in the lattes I brewed, but because of the atmosphere. A place where people could sit, share, and find peace. Fishermen, young couples, passers-by. They came not just for coffee, but for a moment of calm amid life's chaos. They knew of my tragedy not because I spoke of it, but because the news had spread far and wide, yet I rarely talked about it. Instead, I listened to the story of a mother who lost her child, a man who lost faith in life, souls adrift searching for healing. On the wooden wall of the shop, I hung a small plaque engraved with the words, "No one can change the past, but everyone can choose how to live with it." It was a reminder not just for the customers, but for myself. Every time I saw those words, I thought of the days I believed I couldn't go on, and I knew I had chosen to live, not to forget Emery and Caleb, but to turn pain into strength. Years later, I decided to write our story in a small book. not to dwell on the tragedy or reopen old wounds, but to share what I had learned from it all. The book, titled Lights on the Sea, was inspired by the moments Amara and I released paper lanterns on Charleston's shore. I learned that the truth, no matter how deeply hidden, will always find a way out. Justice may not come quickly, but it will come, sometimes at the cost of time and loss. The journey to seek justice for Emery and Caleb took so much from me, but it also showed me that truth is a flame that cannot be extinguished. True love doesn't need titles or lineage. It requires only trust, courage, and the belief that the other person is worth every sacrifice. Amara and I overcame prejudice to find each other. Our love was built on simple moments, like when she taught me to dance salsa, or when we released paper lanterns on the sea. Family is not about blood. My parents chose reputation over the lives of my children, but Amara, Emery, and Caleb, they were my family no matter how painful the past. Power and prestige only have meaning when paired with integrity. My parents sacrificed their conscience to preserve the Whitmore name, but in the end, it was all emptiness. Prejudice is a poison that kills compassion. I once lived in their world where everything was measured by status and lineage, but I chose to leave it behind. When facing loss, revenge is not the answer. I once wanted my parents to suffer as I had, but I realized that justice and healing matter more. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I didn't forgive my parents for their sake, but for mine, to free myself from the chains of hatred, to live for Amara, for our new children, and for myself. I want to tell anyone reading this story, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't stay silent. Never trade the truth for reputation. To love is to protect, not possess. When you truly love someone, have the courage to stand by them even when the world turns its back. And most importantly, peace doesn't come from forgetting the past, but from learning to live better after emerging from it. Every year on the birthdays of Emery and Caleb, our two little angels now running on Charleston's beaches, Amara and I go to the sea and release 2 paper lanterns. We stand there, hand in hand, watching the glowing lights drift across the water, shimmering like small stars in the ocean. It's a reminder that, after all the pain, love and truth are the only things that never fade. I look at Amara, at her smile, and know that we didn't just survive the storm. We found the light, and we will hold it forever. 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 Hold it forever.